Ready?
Yeah, okay. We're just talking to her. There's no ready. There's no action in this.
Okay. Hello, my name is Trevor.
And I'm Jake, and we're both realtors on the Coast to Coast Real Estate team here in Nanaimo.
All right. Jake, another great podcast. The first one didn't go as planned. Had our storage run out on us mid-conversation, but had some good points that we were making, had some good things we were talking about. So today wanted to focus a little bit about inspections, some of the things that are unique to Nanaimo. Everyone's who's bought real estate should be familiar with inspections, but wanted to focus a little bit more about some of the more unique aspects about buying on Vancouver Island and what to look out for in when you are getting an inspection on a home out over here.
Yeah, for sure. First thing, it's nice to have the be able to have inspections back, obviously, and have subjects back in a contract when you're writing on probably your biggest asset or biggest thing you'll ever buy in your life. So that's nice. I think the first thing we'll touch on for inspections and what you should hear about if you're on Vancouver Island, whether it's a brand new home or not, your realtor should probably talk about buried oil tanks, because that's something that's obviously unique to the island and kind of where we are. I know you've dealt with it a lot more than I have, and you just went through a deal with a scan and stuff like that.
That was interesting for sure.
Why don't you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, of course. No, I think that is a great point. That's something that usually in the Pacific Northwest, I'm not too familiar with the history of buried oil tanks throughout the rest of North America, but I know Oregon, Washington, and British Columbia in particular have a pretty rich history of buried oil tanks, which back in the day that was the fancy thing to do. Exactly. That was the cool thing. Was like, oh wow, there are oil tanks underground. They must have a lot of money. But now it's become a bigger and bigger problem, mostly for environmental reasons. A big issue with these buried oil tanks is that if you have one on your property and you find out about it and you go to dig it up and you see, oh man, this thing's cracked and now there's oil leaking throughout my property. In Nanaimo in particular, that puts you in a position where there's a story that went a little viral from a house on Stewart Ave, which is over by the ferry terminal, that had a buried oil tank. They dug it up, realized, oh my goodness, this thing's leaking. The city had to come in, excavate the whole property basically until
no more oil.
Until there's no oil, and that ended up costing the owners $150,000 in unexpected costs, which was something that needed to be paid right away. So that's something in some of the worst case scenarios of an inspection. There's a lot of things that could cause a lot of issues, but something like that, an unexpected oil tank cost, can be absolutely devastating. So I know.
But there's also ways like that's obviously the high-end spectrum. Yeah. There's ways to do it properly, like if oil tank is capped off properly and drained prior to it being decommissioned. Obviously, you can avoid a lot of those. And then there's stories where they're taken out for a couple, $1,000 or whatever. It's just paying someone to excavate it and take it out of your property too. So there is both sides of it. Obviously,
absolutely,
you can do it properly, but obviously, worst cases, you find out your oil tank's cracked, and that. And for a lot of people, that just scares them off right away too. It's like, buried oil tank, I don't even want to look at it.
Yeah, and that the $150,000 plus example is definitely some of the worst case scenarios.
You Google it and you see that story pop up.
Oh right? Yeah, it's terrifying. And at first glances, especially when you look at some of these older homes, like you were alluding to, I had a recent client that scanned the property for an oil tank. We were able to get an accepted offer with our full 2 weeks of due diligence, which is nice. That's something that's pretty new over the last couple of years. And so we were able to see, we first had the building inspection, found, the home was a 40s home, which right away should have some red flags, but saw this mysterious copper line that was in the basement that seemed to kind of just disappear into the ground. And that got us pretty worried after we had that home inspection. Decide the next route here was to scan the property, make sure there's no oil tank somewhere, and after that realized had a very talented and experienced person who come by to scan the property, and he looked in the basement and knew right away, seeing the direction of that copper line, oh wait a minute, this actually goes up, not down, which he just from that indicated that there is likely an above ground oil tank in the basement, which is also very common. But the part that was really helpful is thankfully he saw a neighbor who was outside, and he waves the neighbor down and goes, hey, are you familiar with the neighborhood at all? And he goes, actually, I've lived here for over 60 years. Wow. And he spent a lot of time in that house as a kid, and said, I remember as a young kid playing around in that house, and there was a an oil tank that was in the basement, exactly as he thought, above ground tank in the basement, and said, oh yeah, and the old owners took it out years ago. And with that information, it's so important to be able to even ask around the neighbors and say, hey, what's going on with this place? Are you aware of anything weird about the neighborhood? And it's funny, the oil tank guy, who was the guy who's scanning the property, he carries around a stack of Tim Hortons gift cards, like $10 gift cards. And he'll just, if a neighbor gives him anything helpful, he's like, hey, thanks, man.
I think I got to start.
Appreciate it.
But it's funny, like that on that point, it's not about inspections, but I had a client look at a mobile home. I think we chatted about it before. And they were leaving, and they were, a little bit worried about the area. It was more in the old city area of Nanaimo, and they wanted to get some feedback on the, on the build, on the property itself, on the complex, everything. So there was a neighbor doing some gardening out, and I went and asked her, and she kind of gave me the lowdown on, where they do have some, say, transient issues with some homeless people and stuff like that sometimes. But overall, it's ran great. They don't have any problems. They don't have any like theft or anything like that. So that made my buyer a lot more comfortable with, possibly proceeding with that property, because, there's people there that have been there for, you said, 60 years or 10 years or 5 years, and they have their eye out and they see a lot of things, right? So they can really give you the best insight, and they're not biased at all, right? They're not the seller telling you, hey, we removed this or we did this. It's like, a neighbor that has really nothing to gain except, that maybe someone moves and they don't like.
Yeah, you could have that neighbor that's like, oh, I hate it here and I can't wait to leave. And
I would never buy in here again.
Exactly. And that's just as helpful too if you get that type of person. But
and it's it's in like your best interest of your client to ask those questions.
Yeah, of course.
Because those are like stuff you're never going to see in a listing. A lot of I don't know about, I only done it a couple of times, but it's it's a great thing to do to ask neighbors, because the last thing you want to do is your buyers to buy it and go, man, we love the house, but our neighbors are, they're awful.
Yeah, that's always the worst. You could have an amazing home, but that could quickly get ruined by a nightmare neighbor.
Yeah.
And that's always good to do a little bit of recon and see, not only they might not have any information that's helpful, but the way they respond to your questions could be a great indicator of what type of person you're going to be dealing with in the future. Is this someone that, you knock on their door and you're like, hey, I'm going to be moving next door, and I had a couple questions about the neighborhood, and they slam the door in your face. And
or like, hey, let me help you move, or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. It makes a big difference. I was, when we had that big dump of snow, which doesn't happen all too often on the island, or it's been happening more and more over the years. We had I noticed that the driveway was like super iced over and filled with snow, and the current the home that our clients are purchasing, it was an owner occupied, but there's no one there. And so ended up doing some door knocking, and found a neighbor that let me use their shovel. And they were great, and I cleared the driveway for them, and that was a nice indicator to be like, hey, just letting you know, that neighbor across the street, not only were they like, yeah, feel free to take this shovel, and we also got some salt to salt the roads in your driveway, and looking forward to meeting them. And it's just such a good idea to just, not only for in the process of due diligence, like looking for an oil tank or something like that, but even if you're doing an open house in the area, just getting to know the neighbors.
Hey, we're gonna be doing an open house here, and we'd love you guys to come by and get your feedback on the price. What do you think about the house? And just get to meet some people, and hopefully get some feedback from them, and for your potential buyers or whoever it is that you're doing the open house for or checking out for. It's like, hey, everyone in the neighborhood seems great. They all have young kids. I know you have a 3-year-old son. Like, this would be perfect, right?
Yeah, and selfishly, as realtors, it's a good opportunity to put your face out there, shake some hands, and maybe get a couple of more listings or something out of it. So it makes a big difference just making yourself known and asking questions to the people that are most invested. So.
Back to inspections, you think? So we talked about buried oil tanks.
Yes.
What are some of the things you see, like the top 3 things? You have and it's obviously different for every client,
of course.
But as a realtor, what are the top 3 things that you think that buyers should look out for the most, and things that potentially could really railroad the deal if you're into an inspection?
That's a good question. And a lot of these things, expectations can be set depending on what you're looking at. If you're looking at something that is going to have a ton of work and it's priced accordingly, then your list of priorities can definitely change based off of what you're good at. But the standard is roof, foundation, and then of course plumbing and electrical are some of the bigger things,
especially with the Nanaimo homes where they're built in 1800s, early 1900s. Like, you got these knob and tube and all these different types of stuff we haven't seen. A lot of people don't even know about.
Well, especially and you alluded to it, where Nanaimo, a lot of people are surprised by, is the second oldest town in British Columbia. We have 100-plus-year-old homes that are pretty common, especially through the downtown and old city area. And when you start looking at homes that have had generations of people living in it, there's a lot of handy people out there.
Patchwork, right?
A lot of, like you'll find electrical over electrical over electrical, and it's hard to decipher what you're really looking at. And especially with homes in the island moves a little bit slower, and so making sure that a home that might be past the standard range of having asbestos or poor plumbing or wiring, and that's a situation where we've always done things a little bit slower compared to the mainland and everywhere else.
Island time, we call it, right?
Exactly. And so that's where having that inspection and looking at some of the more detail oriented things like, well, is there asbestos in the attic? And even if there isn't, there might be some in the tiles or the walls. And that's something where it's a lot harder to test for.
Yeah.
But if you're planning on knocking all the walls down and doing a massive amount of
renovations,
renovations,
you got to know, right? Because that changes your budget of $30,000 for renos to $50,000 because you got to remediate the asbestos and stuff, or more money, right? Like just throwing out a ballpark figure there. So that's definitely true. And I had a home out in Crofton that my buyers didn't end up going through with. We had a whole inspection, which was great for them. It gave them a lot more clarity on, like the big thing was like your electrical panel, right? Because some of those homes, I found this out recently with that inspection, was there's certain breakers out there that have like burst into flames and stuff. Like the way they had it, right? They had aluminum going in there, and it would heat up, catch fire, and boom, right? Stuff like that. And then the poly B as well.
Yeah, poly B is a big one, especially for any sort of 90s build homes. It's and a lot of people aren't familiar with poly B. Basically, back in the 90s, we found this new tubing and plumbing material that we're wow, this is way cheaper than the stuff we've been using, like copper and all these other material. But it's so much cheaper. What's the downside? And years later, found out that this the poly B material in particular was great at transporting just water.
Yeah.
But if that water had debris or kitchen waste or soap or anything else, you would find these little pinhole leaks that can start to show up, and sometimes it's you're not getting that, and it's working fine, and it's worked fine for years and years. But the big thing as well is right away for home insurance purposes, they're going to look at right away they're going to say, poly B, here's your premium at a much higher rate than what you would be paying if it didn't have it. And of course, if you're looking at a home that has like radiant heat through water, and the whole house is poly B, you could be in a situation where you're, ripping out the floorboards and having to basically dig out plumbing throughout the entire home.
Yeah.
And it could be a total nightmare. So it's something where it's something to be aware of. It's something to add to the list of things if you're getting an inspection. Does it have poly B? Is there any sign of a buried oil tank? Is there old knob and tube wiring, or what's the main ticket items here that are going to give you some issues?
And you have to look in the eras, right? Like your realtor should know, okay, in this from the 90s on, you should look at poly B, or from the 60s and stuff, we're looking at asbestos, right? They should all know that. Every house is different, obviously. You're probably not going to have a home built in 2015 and you're like, hey, is there a buried oil tank around here, right?
Yeah. You're
probably not going to have that. Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't put it past.
Well, it's possible. Who knows what the old house was before?
Well, exactly. You never know, right? Yeah. But there's certain things you have to look for in certain, in certain areas.
Totally. And a couple other things when we're talking about unique Vancouver Island things to look out for if you're looking at a home. There's even some differences between Victoria and Nanaimo, or Nanaimo to Sayward, or there's that's why you see a lot of agents who are Victoria specific, just work in Victoria, or people in Nanaimo who are Nanaimo specific. You don't see a lot of crossover between those two markets. And I think that because there is a lot of nuances between the two. Victoria takes their heritage sites and their heritage buildings, historical buildings, quite seriously, and there can be pretty stringent with the rules of what you can and cannot do to an old historical building. And that's something that you really have to look out for if you're looking at some of these older character homes and you're like, wow, this is great. What a lovely old home, but I want to paint it a certain color, or I want to renovate it a certain way.
Redo the kitchen, or put something in there.
Or update the windows. Those are all things that potentially, you could buy the home and then you go to do this work and someone from the city shows up at your door and says, actually.
Those windows you just paid $35,000 for.
Yeah,
take them out.
Exactly. But and in Nanaimo, we're far less strict with what you can and cannot do. There's very few historical buildings that the city will put their foot down. The Bastion,
which is a funny one, I think. When you told me that, I didn't know.
Yeah, it's like that's really the Bastion, which is our really old. It's more of a tourist attraction. No one's living in it.
Yeah.
Is one of the only buildings in Nanaimo you can't change.
Yeah.
And that's interesting because you see a lot of these homes, you would think, wow, this is over 100 years old, looks pretty original. Would we be able to do any renovations or even touch anything about this home? And most of the time it's, go for it. We'll give you some suggestions. Hey, paint it a certain color, or make sure if you want to keep the historical integrity, here are some suggestions, but they can't force you to. And
have you dealt with that? Like, I've never dealt with that personally. Like, I've never had a client buy a house old enough. I guess I had my mom buy an older house where it wasn't any historical stuff. We checked, it was all good. But I've actually never dealt with having some suggestions provided, and
it's great. I was quite surprised. I had a client of mine who was looking at a home on Victoria Ave, which is not in Victoria but in Nanaimo, close to downtown, and it was a home that was, I think, built in 1901 or something like that, and it was this grand Victorian style home, and was spectacular looking, and had a lot of its original integrity. And I went to the historical society with the city of Nanaimo and was like, hey, clients potentially interested in buying this home, what can and what can't they do to the property in regards to renovations? And they're like, well, we would suggest to keep this type of paint, and we'd suggest all these things, but legally they could do whatever they want. And I was quite surprised to hear that. But it's, one thing, if you're driving around Nanaimo, you might notice a lot of BC box style homes. And it was back in the day, that was the cheapest way to build a house, and it was a very popular way to build a house. And there's all these character homes that were getting knocked down, and a slew of these 70s, 80s style homes that were just built. So we have whole neighborhoods that look like the BC box style.
Well,
home.
I guess, and I can understand why you said it's literally a box. A big rectangle. So you see a 4-bed, 2-bath, or whatever it is, right?
Easy to change, or
easy to renovate, and those actually jumped up quite a bit in price now, because you see a lot of people putting suites in them too, right?
Yeah, well, it's it's a great template. It's size wise and layout wise, it's very easy to adjust and change. But
talking about Nanaimo a lot, so you're talking about knocking stuff down and building new homes like these BC boxes and stuff. Like Nanaimo, like unlike Vancouver and other places in Victoria, is like you have a lot bigger lot sizes here, right? Like you're getting 0.15, 0.2 of an acre, like these old, these old city lots kind of thing that you just don't get now. You see them getting rezoned to 0.1 of an acre, and they have these skinny houses with a little bit of a backyard, but you have 6 foot between your neighbor, right? So that's
basically a townhouse, but not.
Yeah, right. Exactly, right. So that's kind of interesting, I think. And then I don't know, and I'm trying to think, inspections. What else can you, there's...
Yeah, what are some other things to look out for? In Nanaimo, a few things that people aren't aware of is that Nanaimo was originally created as a coal mining town.
Yeah.
That's a big thing that a lot of people don't realize when they show up to the island and they're checking out Nanaimo in particular. Obviously Nanaimo, it's super central. We're basically almost dead center of the island.
Well, to touch on that before, because I love that people go, why would you want to live in Nanaimo? You think about it, and you're an hour and a half from Victoria. An hour and 10 minutes if you drive fast. You're a 20-minute seaplane ride to Vancouver, or an hour and a half ferry. Like, people are, I want to live in Kelowna, or I want to live here. It's the island living. You get this crazy lifestyle of ocean, mountains, everything you want, and you're close. You're closer, and it's cheaper to go to Vancouver than it is to come down from Kelowna.
Oh man,
you miss the Coquihalla, which is always treacherous. I don't like that drive at all.
No.
And so I think when you talk about central, you said not only on the island and Tofino and all these other places, but like access to the mainland. It's really, and with the fast ferry coming in, I mean, they've talked about that for a long time.
It's coming next summer, any day now.
If it does come, right? That's another huge thing. Is it's 50 minutes and you're down in Gastown. Like you want to go out on a date night, or you want to do something like that. It really adds value for a lot of people that are, or even if you work in Vancouver and you have to commute 2 days a week or whatever. So what? You drive from Pitt Meadows to Vancouver for 50 minutes, or you take a fast ferry.
True. That's so true. And that's one thing that really I gravitated toward Nanaimo personally. Like you, I was someone who moved from the mainland over to Vancouver Island. I didn't grow up here. I selected the island very intentionally. For me, it was funny enough because I have a history of I bounced around quite a bit growing up. I as you know, I grew up in the U.S. Till I was about 13. Bounced around all different parts of the United States. I was born in Portland, but lived in Hawaii for about 10 years, and then lived in Seattle for about 5 years, and then moved to Grand Prairie, Alberta, on a farm, and was there until I graduated high school. And for me, it was as soon as I moved to Northern Alberta, it has its perks. But I was like, there has to be a place in Canada that has nicer weather than this.
All year round.
There's got to be. And that's where, for me, I basically, how I decided where I was going to move was I went on Google Earth. I looked at all of Canada during the winter.
Yeah.
I saw a big thing of white snow, and I saw a little patch of green off the coast of Vancouver. And I'm like, Kate, that's Canada's version of Hawaii. That's a place I got to check out. Found out about Nanaimo and Victoria, and of course Victoria had a ton of appeal to it, but I saw Nanaimo was kind of a more up and coming area, and that there was a lot more opportunities out there from employment wise at the time. And for me, it was how close it was to everything. Like you said, you're in less than 2 hours to Vancouver if you're taking the traditional ferry. You're less than 2 hours from Victoria if you want to drive. To Fino, it's about a 2 hour drive. It's and being from Alberta, a 2 hour drive is nothing. But you
have to get gas or something.
Exactly. But in on the island, there's some people who've lived in Nanaimo their whole life and never been to Victoria or to Fino, which blows my mind.
Funny thing about the whole time span on being on the island, what people don't get is I had some clients move over to Vancouver, and they were like, hey, as long as I'm half an hour from a Costco and half an hour from a grocery store, wherever we buy, I'm fine, Jake. We're all good. And we looked at a house in South Nanaimo, and we went all the way to North Nanaimo. And it took us about 25 minutes. And I said, well, guys, the good news is we just drove the whole length of Nanaimo in about 25 minutes. So you're pretty much within Costco no matter where you live here. And they were just kind of blown away because you think about traditional Vancouver traffic and, going from, like I lived in Maple Ridge, going to Burnaby, it's 40 minutes, right? Or 45 minutes. And you think about Highway 1, the traffic.
It's crazy. It's crazy.
Yeah, so it's the island's just so unique in that way, right? And so I said it's island time. We always joke about how slow it is, the drivers, but it's also really nice because more genuine connections with people. I have a lot more conversations at gas stations and Tim Hortons and all these other places that I have in Vancouver. And there's a fraction of the people here.
For me, I get asked, well, would you ever want to move to Vancouver and
never go back?
And for me, it's the day-to-day stuff. Like you said, 15 minutes to get anywhere, but you're still close enough to international airports and everything where it's easy to, if you want to go travel or make a trip or go to a big city, you could, for me, I like going to Vancouver for a weekend or a week at the most. But being able to come back home and, it's, you don't have to worry about a huge amount of traffic like in Seattle was, there'd be a Mariners or Seahawks game and your 10-minute trip turned into a 2 hour trip. And for me, it's fun if you want to do it every now and then, but the day-to-day lifestyle of it, I love how in Nanaimo, it's just, you could be in 20 minutes. You could be in downtown to an amazing park with a wide open beach and no one else there. And
another cool thing I just thought about when you said that is a lot of people don't know this on the island is they have the Clipper in Victoria, so that takes you right to Seattle as well.
Yeah,
so,
that's great.
Like you can get pretty much anywhere. It seems like you can get to the States, you get to Vancouver.
It's true.
Like you can really get anywhere, and like you said, Charlie, you can go from amazing beaches with no one on them to Mount Benson and do a hike and see and have a whole view, or you can go an hour and a half and go to Mount Washington and go snowboarding. Like there's
a lot of options.
A lot of options and stuff that I haven't even personally checked out yet, but they're on my bucket list to do, right? The things I have to travel the whole island before I go anywhere else because there's so many things to do.
I know, right? It's like, okay, it's so true. There's so many things that I've been here, like 8, 9, almost 10 years now. And there's still so many things on my list of things to see and do on the island that I still haven't done yet. And it's nice to be able to, you could go surfing or snowboarding in the same day. And that's something.
That's actually, that's crazy.
And there's only a few places in the world that I think can lend themselves to that. You have like the Big Island in Hawaii. And I don't know, maybe New Zealand or something. I don't know. But it's nice that we have such versatility of where we can and cannot go. But I think that anyway, we're talking. This is becoming a Nanaimo promo.
Anyways,
but back to inspections. What are the things at hand here?
When we talk about some recent stuff, I don't know. Like I had some. I can talk about seller point of view, right? The difference now between 6 months or a year ago is you have buyers have a lot more power too, right? You get an inspection done, and it's there's these 5 things that we're really worried about. Before it was like, that's awesome, you know about them, now you can fix them if you were able to get an inspection. Now it's, you have leverage to negotiate price or get it fixed. That's the other thing you talk about, negotiating price over getting it fixed is what's the right way to go. If you were helping a buyer, what would you suggest for them if they had, say 5 things and they were like, hey, we'll fix them, or we can give you a $5,000 discount, let's say $1,000 each. What would you recommend for your client?
Yeah, well, of course, you'd rather get the money to get it fixed yourself, because the vast majority of the time, if a seller's told, hey, fix this, or before I move in, I want this thing done, you put yourself in a position where the seller's going to do the cheapest, most baseline, satisfactory.
So it'll be done,
but it won't be done. It might not be done well, and that's something where you're better off to just get it done yourself. And I think that's a big part of it, and that goes into a bigger conversation about how do you utilize an inspection to get further discounts, or how do you use that inspection to get yourself the best deal possible. And I think that a big part of it is understanding, okay, why is the home priced the way it is? And when you see a home that is listed a certain way, you might say, okay, well, when they listed this home, were they taking into consideration, oh, the roof needs to be replaced, oh, the plumbing is shot, or there's a foundation issue. If these are things that they said, oh, well, the home is worth $600 if the roof was in perfect shape, but we've priced it at $550 because we know that the roof needs to be done and there's all this other stuff that needs to be done. Then you having an inspection coming back and saying
the roof,
hey, why don't you, the roof is busted, and they're like, yeah, of course, that's we knew that when we were pricing it, so that's why it's priced the way it is. But if you're showing up to with an inspection report with a list of things that the seller is likely unaware of,
it's the first time for both you kind of finding out.
Exactly.
Then that's where you gain that leverage is, hey, like, we didn't know the furnace was busted, we didn't know the roof, hey, your back deck is rotting out and we need to replace that. Like, it becomes a safety issue. Now there's $35,000 worth of work. You're not going to get the seller to pay all of that unless they're very, very motivated.
Yeah, sure.
But I mean, splitting it in the middle, kind of in the half, it seems like what I've seen in a lot of things is, hey, there's $5,000, let's split it $2,500.
Yeah, and it's at the end of the day, it has to be something that makes sense to everyone involved. And if you're showing up and bringing new information and saying, hey, this is something that if we walk away, you're going to have to disclose this to the next set of buyers. So you may as well just get it done with us. That's something that it goes such a long way. Most sellers aren't getting pre-inspections done. I'm
not a big fan of pre-inspections. I feel like you just add yourself. I mean, you get a pre-inspection done, they say this, this, and this. Say the roof, this, and this. It's like, was the seller, are you going to put the money into fixing it? Because now you have to disclose it, right? You have to say, hey, my roof's busted. And if you didn't know, obviously, right? So now it's like, do I put this $15,000 to fix it, or do I price my house that way? But I could list the house and say, hey, we've listed it accordingly at $550 because we know these things. And, list a buyer's agent say, hey, we love it, but our clients think it's worth $520. Like, that's their, so, pricing accordingly always doesn't mean it's going to account for those things to a buyer, because the buyer still has to find value, to see value in the price, right? And in this market, what we're in now, obviously that inspection adds value, but they have to see value in the overall listing price, right? You're not seeing where it was, where you could be $20,000 or $50,000 above what it should sell for, and it's still 30 people would line up to see it, and it would sell for $100,000 more. Right. So the pre-inspection thing is like, it's a risky business in a sense, right? Because you really open yourself up to a lot of things.
Well, I think also you open yourself up as a seller to liability. If you're saying, hey, we had this pre-inspection done, and turns out there's a bunch of other issues that popped up, and the buyer goes, well, wait a minute, how come your pre-inspection report didn't catch the tarp on the roof, or the mold in the basement, or
the rat droppings or something in that.
Exactly. It just puts you in a potential legal position that you don't want to be in. And I think that, those pre-inspections, more times than not, they put you up for more liability than they do help. And I know in a lot of markets, those pre-inspections are super common practice. I know in the Toronto area, there's a lot of people will lean on pre-inspections, and it's standard practice where listing agents will offer a pre-inspection as incentive to list with them. And I think that in this type of market, especially now as buyers are becoming more and more scarce, it's put more and more people are trying to figure out, well, how can I get more people to look at my home instead of somebody else's? And that is where pre-inspection can be helpful. But at the same time, you have to be ready to be prepared for that type of liability. And if that inspection report finds something that you're not too excited about, that's something you still have to disclose. You know, if it's a situation where, oh yeah, we had this inspection report. Oh man, they found a bunch of mold and stuff. You know what? Maybe let's forget about this report.
Hey, yeah, you didn't really actually do this inspection. And you can't do that, right? Obviously.
No, of course not. And that's where, you know, you'll find people who go, wait a minute, like, your new buyer buys the home and says, where'd all this mold come from? And then the neighbor says, oh, aren't
they dealt with that for years?
Yeah. So. Why are you? I'm surprised it didn't show up on the inspection report. And they're like, what inspection report?
Yeah.
And that's, you know, opens up to a whole sorts of issues.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think that, you know, those are having a good inspector, and also some of the main points and main benefits of working with a good realtor is knowing a guy who knows a guy. Yeah. And that's where realtors are so helpful, is where you're able to go, actually, I've worked with dozens of inspectors, and, you know, there's some companies it's hit and miss because they have a whole bunch of different inspectors working for them and you never know who you're going to get. Yeah. Or I know these two guys in particular are very thorough and very consistent. Yeah. And that's where you're able to lean on that's where you get your money's worth with the buyer's agent, is the type of trades and the type of people who know what they're doing and are able to give you a quality job. Because at the end of the day, on that inspection report, in the fine print at the bottom, it will say, oh, and by the way, if there's any issues with this house that we didn't catch, it's not our fault. Don't sue us. And you're on the hook for it. That people think that, you know, they have this inspection report and they find they find these issues that weren't on the report, and then they can go back and point to the inspector and be like, why didn't you catch this? Pay up. But at the end of the day, you know, looking at a lot of these outrageous claims that have come from past lawsuits in the BC Supreme Court.
It's buyer beware. Usually.
Buyer beware, buyer due diligence. That's the vast majority of the time how they rule. Yeah. It's, you had an inspection, you were happy with it. At the end of the day, you could have done more research. You could have looked into it further, but you decide to buy the place. Buyer beware. Yeah. That's so often the case.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, inspectors, I've heard it from a couple I've worked with. You know, I can't see through walls. I don't have X-ray vision, right? And they don't, right? They're not cutting open walls. They're doing the best they can do on that day. You know, they go look at a house and it's middle of August and it's, you know, dry as a bone. Yeah, it's dry as hell. And they look at it and then you know, it hits rainy season and then there's a leak. And it's like, well, they wouldn't have known that unless there was watermarks.
Yeah, they're spraying the house with a hose, waiting for something to come.
Yeah, I know this is going to happen here, right? Like, exactly. You're never going to know, right? They can give you an idea, but like I said, they're never liable, and they're just doing. And that's the thing with an inspection, right? Is they're never liable. They're just doing. They have obviously a lot of experience behind them, but they're just doing the best they can on that day and checking out the stuff that they know. And it's the big ticket items, right? You know what I mean? Like a broken window or some paint that needs to be replaced. Sure. That's no big deal. It's the big. It's your furnace, it's your roof, it's like your foundation, that kind of stuff.
Well, and it's one of those things as well where you have a home inspection subject in your contract saying we're going to get this home inspected by a professional home inspector. That doesn't mean that's the only thing you can do.
Yeah, a lot of people don't know that too.
Yeah, it's like you get the home inspection. The home inspector says, I'm no electrician, but this electrical looks like it's in really rough shape. You should have an electrician check it out. Also, the roof looks like it needs work done, but I'm not a roofer. You should have a roofer check it out. Yeah. And next thing you know, you have a handful of trades you got to refer out to. And that's something where you go back to the seller's agent and you say, hey, listen, we had a home inspection. Turns out that he's advising us that we need to look into the electrical further. Yeah. We need to have an electrician check this out before we remove subjects. That's something that can be done. And I highly suggest it, because at the end of the day, a home inspector is, jack of all trades, but master of none in a lot of aspects. Yeah. Where, sure, they know all the general things to look out for, but they can't say, oh yeah, there's a buried oil tank here, the electrical all needs to be replaced. They could say, you should have someone look into this, 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 and this. And then you take, it's great to have that inspection as early as possible. Let's say you have 2 weeks to do your research, have that inspection within a couple days. And then you have the next 2 weeks to call electricians, call plumbers, call people that, can reference that report and saying, it could be the same with home insurance.
Save you thousands, right? Like I know I had a buyer buy in the Old City area. It was one of my first deals I ever did. And we got the home inspection company. He said, hey, everything looks good, but there's 2 suites in this house. And there's only a 100 amp panel. We should maybe get someone to look at it. And the inspector came out, the electrician came out. and said, yeah, no, everything looks good. Like you can get through with this, but you know, you might blow a couple breakers here and there. And then we had a second quote because they wanted a second quote done.
Yeah.
And you know, it's something that I didn't even think about is I was like, oh, it probably wouldn't cost probably $5-6 to upgrade a panel. And because of how far the house was from the road and the power poles, it was about a $20,000 difference.
Oh my goodness.
To get that upgraded and done, which is great because we got the inspection and we found that out. And you know, we were to negotiate with the seller a price that was fair to accommodate the fact that this electrical panel, you know, could possibly need some work in the future. Doesn't mean we have to do it right now. If we want to do this, it's going to be a $20,000 bill. So, you know, we have to make this seem that price has to work accordingly. So, and it all worked out, right? But those are things I said, never would have known that. The inspector said, hey, it looks like it needs some work, but I'm no electrician, like you said, right? So maybe call professional. No,
I think that's a great way to summarize the importance of inspections and how to utilize them to their best potential. So, but well, I think this was a good first start to our podcast today. It's covered a wide range of topics, and I think that going into this market, especially going to the spring and summertime, you know, we're making this podcast as of January of 2023. So a lot of big things coming up. I'm sure in future episodes we'll talk about our thoughts of the market, what's going to happen, do some speculating. And we'll also talk, you know, if eventually in the comments and you have questions and stuff and that you want us to cover stuff in more depth, we're here to help. And like I said, Trevor, going into January 2023, we're coming into a market where it's more important than ever to have a realtor that is doing this full time. Yeah. That's a big one. You see doing it full time, one that is good at communicating and one that has those contacts like Trevor was saying. Yeah, knows a guy, knows a guy. Knows a guy that knows a guy, but has someone you can have open dialogue with, right? Like I find, I've had a couple people I've talked to that I haven't ended up working with that are just kind of closed off, and it's not a bad thing, but your realtor's on your side and their job is to do the best they can for you. Their fiduciary duty is to do the best they can do for you and make, the best deal and present all the facts. Yeah. So when you have an agent and you're looking at a market like this, it's good to have an open dialogue to be able to talk about these things. Yeah, communication style is so important. Well, communication is key, right? Like I think about deals that, if they wouldn't have shared something with me and I wouldn't have remembered that thing, it's like, oh, that could have been way differently, right? So knowing their end game, right? Like knowing what they're trying to do at the end of the tunnel, for sure, it's very important in a market like this. Well, any market, but more than ever in a market like this. Yeah, well, it's and you're hoping that you're going to find a realtor that you can work with for life. Someone who is able to kind of your friend in a sense, where you have the open dialogue. I would say kind of a friend's a good one. But yeah, someone you can work with for life. Someone that you trust is always gonna have your best interests. For sure. No, it's so important, and it's a relationship that most people move every 5 years. And so it's a long-term one if you're planning on sticking with the same guy and leaning on that realtor for not only helping you purchase and sell but also for, hey, I'm looking at doing some renovations. Who's a good guy that that can help with this type of thing, or be your resource for your your local guide for the new town that you're moving to. Well, we tell all of our clients, I say our job really doesn't end oh, here's your keys, have a good one. Don't call me anymore. It's like I'd love to see pictures or a call or go over for dinner and be like, hey, check out the renos we did. Check this out. And you get to see all those things. And or hey, I have a friend moving. They're wondering they already have a realtor, but they're wondering what some areas. What do you think? Yeah, right. So your job doesn't stop there. Yeah, exactly. And if it does, you're probably not getting a lot of good retention by your clients either. Yes, very very few jobs allow you to make friends while you work. And I find that. Have a beer or two, maybe. Yeah, and especially with our job, it's so much of our business is working with people like us who weren't from here, who are now coming to the island. Yeah, and those are the type of people I really resonate with on a friendship level, because it's someone who had the same type of mentality of, I like my town, but I feel like the island has a lot to offer, and are gravitating toward that certain type of adventure of packing everything up and moving to an island in the ocean. Yeah, and, exactly. And I think that it's nice to be able to meet those people, and some of my best friends are people that I've met through real estate and helping them buy or sell, and it is it's great to have that relationship. And so it's great in the long run, and you never know with some of the clients that you get how they could help you out as well. It's always you help someone buy a place with a pool and you're like, hey, invite me to your next pool party. Yeah, exactly. Or you run to a client like I did, and they're like, they specialize in pools, right? So that's their thing. So it's like your next client, 5 years down the road is like, hey man, this pool's messed up. It's like, well, I know a guy that knows a guy. It's a small world. It really is, right? You don't understand how small it is until you're like, I swear I see this person all the time.
and then they end up being a client. So, they actually go to my gym, or they do this, or whatever it is, right?
Well, especially in Nanaimo, we got 100,000 people here, and that's
growing.
And yes, and hopefully we're bringing more people.
Yeah.
But it's one of those places where you can't just churn and burn people. If someone has a bad experience and tells 8 of their friends, who tells more and more people, you're not going to last very long out here.
Yeah.
So it makes a big difference, and relationships are everything out here. So well, this was a fun first episode. Glad we were able to chat about a ride,
and excited to do more.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for watching. Appreciate the people who are listening and tuning in for the first time, and maybe years into the future to see how we're predicting and this future market and what to do with inspections. So hopefully you found a little bit of value out of this, and looking forward to seeing you on the next one.
And if you have any more questions for us, particularly for inspections, feel free to shoot us a message on one of our social media platforms. We're happy to help.